Everyone should be able to say hi to Jeff. I think it's recording. I think. Good luck, Jeff. All right. Hopefully, Jeff, all that Tech Aid stuff that you and Aaliyah have done for me this year will come in handy. No. I don't know. I don't know anything about what computer applications is doing. So Jeff, what we were saying is that I posted a quick question. Just read over this. You can just respond in Google Classroom. There's no need for you to have to, create a document or anything like that. I'll just give a few points for it. No big deal. Just have it done by Tuesday by class, please. Okay, the other thing that I shared, and this is for all of you. First of all, funny Mr. Betts about Nixon. Also, the 90s and 2000s quiz. This is what I'm planning. So I'm planning for next Thursday, and this is why I'm thinking this. I looked at the calendar when I was trying to figure out when I wanted to do the 90s and 2000s quiz. And my concern is it looks like maybe there's going to be some people out on Friday with track and color guard, I think, and some other stuff. So I wanted to be sure that we weren't trying to do the test. Like I wasn't giving the quiz, not test, on Friday, and then people missed, and then I had 7 people having to come in like the week of STAR testing, and I mean that adds more stress to the test and all that kind of stuff. Plus, the whole purpose of doing these quizzes is to prepare you for the test, so it seems counterintuitive. So we're going to do it on Thursday. So I'm going to go ahead and start. I'm talking about the 90s and 2000s. The document that I posted, it has to do with the 90s and 2000s. So we'll talk about that with the rest of today and all day on Tuesday. Hopefully, I'll get through it all. If I'm really close to being done, or if I just need to kind of hit a few topics or something, I'll do that on Thursday right at the start, and then we'll take the 90s and 2000s quiz at the end of class. If I have very much to do, I may have to record a short lecture or something like that, and you might have to listen to it, Tuesday night or Wednesday. But that way, you'll have all the information. I've already opened the Socrative for that one. It's already open, so you can start studying for that. So you'll have that to look for. And so that way we'll get that last quiz out of the way and be able to move on. Then Friday, we'll do STAR review. We'll start looking at some of the resources that you guys have available, things you can practice and look at. You're going to need, and this is Friday a week from tomorrow. We're going to need to, or you are going to need to be sure that you kind of look over some of that stuff. Is this a hard test? Not necessarily. But you guys have been taking these practice quizzes, and this gives you an idea of what that test will be like. Now, will it be the same? Will it be a little bit harder? There's going to be a few tricky questions that are hard, so you just need to be prepared for that. And it's a good idea not to treat it like a blow-off, because you have to have it to graduate. So you want to be sure that you do put a little effort in, not that you have to cram. I wouldn't expect you to do that. And we'll do some review on Friday. And then Tuesday, 2B and 3B are going to get a little extra review session. You guys aren't, though, because next Tuesday we're doing all the juniors are doing like a EOC Blitz kind of thing. We're going to have 5 rooms, and we're going to rotate. And then for 5th period, everyone's going to be in the cafeteria. We're going to be going over some stuff, okay? So we're kind of doing kind of a big thing on Tuesday, but it's going to affect your class. So I won't see you guys as a class on Tuesday during 4B. So, that's not a huge deal. But so that you'll just want to be sure that you've familiarized. And so we'll talk about that a week from tomorrow. Make sure you know. And I've shared some of that stuff with the Quizlets and whatever. But I'll make sure you have all that prepared. So you can kind of maybe, look at some stuff or whatever. And that way when you come in on Tuesday, you kind of have it all kind of pushed to the front of your head. So when you come in on Wednesday, you're you're ready to go. So I think that's pretty much it. As far as getting ready for the STAR test. Now, once the STAR test is over on that Thursday, I've got a video over that it's related to NSC 68, which is going to be the next thing we're working on, which is the Eastfield Objective Essay. So we're going to watch that video. If we get through it in time, then I might have a short video or something on the Patriot Act, because those are the concepts that you're going to need to be familiar with as far as the Eastfield Objective Essay. And I think the Eastfield Objective Essay for the spring is a little bit challenging, if you want the honest truth. I don't think it's the simplest one ever. So anyhow, any questions on any of that? Okay. All right, so end of the millennium. That's where we're at, right? So we're going to start with looking at the 1988 election. So here's kind of, as we're going into 1988, we're at the tail end of Reagan's second administration. If you remember from listening to that short video, the Iran-Contra scandal had splashed some mud, metaphorically speaking, on some Republicans. Now, again, Oliver North does a pretty good job of pleading the fifth and kind of shielding people. You have this question of, did Reagan actually ask them to break the law that Congress had established and fund weapons to the Contras? Or was it underlings that kind of got out of hand? I don't know for sure. Hello?
You have a question?
What?
I'm sorry, we can ask you later.
Well, I'm interrupted
Sorry,
now.
interrupted.
Okay. Anyways, but I want to be a smart aleck, but I'm not. Don't be scared. So yeah. So the issue is, who really gave this order to break the law? Now this is kind of the gist of what happened. So beginning really with the New Deal in World War II, you have a massive expansion of the executive office, okay, and the powers of that branch of government. Remember that our founding fathers were very concerned about that. They didn't want an executive that was too strong, because that would lead to tyranny. But the demands of a modern society had started to invest more and more power to that executive office. And the culmination of that is going to be, the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution and the Vietnam War and all that kind of stuff. So Congress will then reassert itself after Vietnam, after Nixon. And they'll say, you know what, we're going to make some rules so that way the executive branch is kind of restrained. And one of the things that they do is make it so that the president can't, just willy-nilly send advisors and stuff in. Now, that's not to say that that Congress isn't doing that, because that's how the Mujahideen are being held, right? That's not coming from the president, that's coming from Congress. So Congress can kind of choose to do that stuff, but the executive branch cannot. So the big dilemma with the Iran-Contra scandal is this an abuse of executive power? And like I said, Oliver North pleads the fifth, kind of shields the guys in charge, says, no, it was just this small group of us, and we kind of got carried away, and he gets slapped on the hand, and everyone kind of moves on. But the problem is, George H.W. Bush, or Bush 41, because he's the 41st president, gets splashed a little bit with some of this mud, right? So this is going to be a little bit of some baggage that he's carrying with him. You're also going to see some baggage about the problems in American society. One of the things that's happened with Reaganomics, right, is that you have in this process of scaling back government, making government smaller, redefining what government does. Remember, Reagan brings in a conservative resurgence that says, oh my goodness, the way we've been doing things isn't right, government's the problem, not the solution. And so part of what he's doing is scaling back government programs, right? The suburbs don't want to keep footing the bill for the inner cities and the poor neighborhoods. So in doing that, you're going to create a vacuum. A vacuum where there's communities that are struggling to have job opportunities, that have poor educational systems, that don't have resources, where the outlook is very bleak because we've scaled back a lot of these different programs, okay? In the midst of this, another layer to this is going to be American drug policy. That really, in some ways, goes all the way back to the 1920s and the concern about jazz musicians and jazz music. You also have a little bit of industrial kind of demands in the 1920s where you had hemp was starting to really challenge paper, and you had, and I don't remember the guy's name, but you had an industrialist that kind of had a lot of stock in paper companies, and didn't want hemp to challenge paper. And so you have these laws against growing marijuana and about marijuana. And over time, when you get to Nixon, right, and I mentioned this the other day, he's going to focus on drug laws as a way of kind of off to the side targeting his political opponents, right? Knowing that this is going to target the anti-war people, this is going to target the Black Panthers, if we create these tough drug laws. So the United States has this very strict drug policy going into the 1980s. At the same time that we have a vacuum of services and resources and opportunity in the inner city, for lack of a better term. It's a little bit of a generalization, but you guys know what I'm talking about. So that's going to be a problem. And after Vietnam, after the counterculture movement of the 60s and 70s, drug use is a thing, right? Drugs are in demand. Well, this turns on classic market economics, right? Where you have a demand for a product that is not easily available. You have a globalized transportation system. You have drug cartels that don't have that level of oversight that say, hey, there's a market in the United States for heroin, cocaine, marijuana, fill in blank, right? And so now the problem that they had was having marketers and salespeople. But now, because we've gutted these inner city programs, you've created essentially a built-in sales force, right? And enter gangs and crime and violence and drug addiction, because now, right, we've got this classic market economy taking over, all right? So that's going to be an issue. Now, I explain all of this to you because crime in the late 80s and early 90s was a big deal, okay? People were very concerned about the rates of crime, the rates of murder, the rates of drug use. They felt that society was being, hurt, all this kind of stuff. So you want to be sure that you kind of understand that's going to be an issue that the Republicans are having to deal with, right? That they have somehow created this system and they've been weak about crime and they haven't taken care of it the way they should, okay? And so that's going to be an issue. You're also going to see the AIDS crisis is an issue. Reagan and his administration was very reluctant to do anything about the AIDS crisis, particularly when they thought it was affecting groups that they didn't really care about, right? But by the time you get to 88 and 89, we know this is a global pandemic. We know it's not just gay men or drug users. We know it's able to affect people of all different types. And so it's beginning to raise awareness. So this is going to be an issue for George Bush. Plus, right, you've got people that are a little bit concerned about the economy. You've seen the wealth inequality of Reagan's administration, that trickle-down economics, that cut taxes for the wealthiest individuals, and yet, right, it doesn't trickle down to the middle class. So your middle class is continuing to pay taxes and deal with this stuff, even as you've got your wealthiest individuals that are making more money. And so there's a little bit of concern. There's a concern about the deficits, right? Yes, the Cold War seems to be over in 1988. And people are thinking, okay, we can start to move past this. But remember, we've had this long sustained period of tension and military expenditure. And military expenditure is kind of like if you go out to eat on a credit card and you swipe your credit card, but you don't have money to pay that balance off right away. So you're going to pay interest on food that your body has digested and drawn nutrition from, and yet you're still paying for it. And you're paying more than you initially paid for it, right? That is not a good use of credit. That you don't have anything to show for that. Yeah, you had momentary pleasure, but that's it. Compare that with, say, buying a house and having, yes, you're going to have a big debt, but you got something to show for it, something that has value. Even in education, for all that student loan debt has its issues, at least you've got something of value, especially if you find a job, right? So these are all things that you need to consider when you think about, debt. Well, in the case of Reagan's administration, he spends a lot on the military. He comes in his first administration, he's talking tough on the Cold War, Soviet Union's an evil empire, and he builds up this military and increases nuclear missiles and talks about the Strategic Defense Initiative, and we have the Challenger and all that kind of stuff, or not Challenger, the Space Shuttle. And yet, all that's going to do is increase the deficit. And military spending is a consumable. You don't build a tank and expect it to sit there and accrue value. It's made to be blown up. It's made to be used. And if it's not used, it'll get outdated. And then it won't be any good for anybody. So we spend money on the military to create things that really don't give us a whole lot of value. Okay? Yes, there might be a temporary, short-term kind of, oh, hey, we created a job because people built these tanks. But it's not going to be sustained growth. Compare that to spending on infrastructure. Think about the Transcontinental Railroad. Think about the interstate highway system. Even the Panama Canal, right? These are things that create transportation routes, that create jobs, that make shipping cheaper, which lower prices, which allow people to buy more, which is going to stimulate economic growth. Even spending on education as a nation tends to create worth because you're going to have people at home that are able to contribute to the economy and are prepared for society and for technology or whatever. So there's a difference in what you spend money on. And in Reagan's administration, there was a lot of money spent on the military, and they tried to cut money from everything else. So what you're going to have is a problem with debt, quality debt. And that's not stimulating economic growth, okay? So when Bush 41 is running for president, you've got questions about that. You've got questions about, these social concerns. And so the 1988 election is kind of a big deal, right? I mean, at first, it doesn't seem very clear who's going to win and who's going to lose. Bush 41 was struggling initially in the polls until you get into that witching season of around September. And then they come up with this ad to target Michael Dukakis, who's the Democrat, okay? Dukakis was the governor from Massachusetts. Part of the issue that he had dealt with as governor was overcrowding in their prison system. Of course, this is part of this increasing crime that we saw in the late 1980s and so forth and so on. So that what's going to happen is he looks at, they create this, Dukakis creates this furlough program that is intended to get kind of non-dangerous criminals to alleviate some of the overcrowding, right? Now the problem is the furlough was a troubled program. It wasn't, there were issues with it, okay? But it was a reaction to the overcrowding. So this one guy, and I can't remember the guy's name, gets out on a furlough, kills a family or something like that, and it looks pretty bad, right? Well, what's going to happen is that Bush 41's campaign is going to take this instance And what's really sad about it is they take the guy's image and they actually darken his skin, right? They make it very racial. And people are going to see this, Michael Dukakis is soft on crime. You don't want somebody who's soft on crime. And remember, Cold War is winding down, right? So it's not going to be about soft on communism. Now it's going to be about soft on crime. Remember what I told you about Nixon and the law and order thing, right? It creates this idea, fill in the blank about what law and order means, all right? And so that's what's going to happen. So Bush 41 is going to win the 1988 election. It's still pretty tight, but Dukakis, there's some missteps by the Democratic Party. And what you're going to see is that Bush 41 is going to come in. Again, he was not a shoo-in. There were controversies about him. And I would argue that Bush 41 is the last country before party politician. Okay? This is a guy that truly cared about governing because it was right, not because this was what my party needs or this is what's going to get me votes. Okay? So he's, in my opinion, he's the last politician like that. And so, he didn't always do things I agreed with, but I do think that overall he was a good president. He was certainly highly qualified. And, what's interesting is, Reagan is sainted in many ways. Oh, Saint Reagan. It's because of him that the Cold War was over. Well, I don't know about that. And yes, there are people that make that argument. I have a husband that likes to make that argument. I don't totally agree. In my opinion, surprise, right? In my opinion, I saw you roll your eyes, Mitchell. Anyway, Mitchell. So here's my problem with the argument that the ramping up of military stuff. So the argument that supports Saint Reagan says that the incredible military spending put this pressure on the Soviet Union and caused the Soviet Union to struggle to keep up economically. And I think there's a little element of truth to that, but I think it's far more complex. Essentially, the Cold War had bogged down the U.S. economy the same as it had bogged down the Soviet economy. Both economies had spent so much for so long on the Cold War and military expenditures, right, that their economies were struggling. The U.S. gets out of Vietnam, okay, and we have that economic malaise. So what's going to happen is that Reagan's going to come in and talk about, we need to build up our military. We need to build up our military. Well, essentially, the Soviets do something similar. They were starting to have an economic malaise as well. Their economy was struggling. So what do? They invade Afghanistan. Okay? And so you have this period of kind of heightened tensions, right? But then, right, whether it's because of the whole, like in the Crash Course video where John Green talks about the NATO that kind of spooked everybody, I don't think it was so much that as it was, Afghanistan was the Soviet Union's Vietnam, right? They started to get bogged down. You started to have Gorbachev come in. And Gorbachev is a different type of communist leader. His line of thinking is more similar to what we see now with the Chinese, right? That is, we want communism. We like the whole one-party thing because different opinions are, inefficient and annoying, right? He wants different opinions. And so he still kind of feels that way, but he also recognizes that the economic stagnation of the Soviet Union needs to be jump-started, needs to be fixed. And again, remember after World War II, we have globalization. You have a globalized economy, you have a focus on, everybody trading, and the Soviet Union, because of the way their economy functioned, was not benefiting from that, okay? So in many ways, Gorbachev is being very, economically open. He realizes that if the Soviet Union is going to recover financially from this stagnation, we have to engage with the rest of the world economically. So let's open it up a little bit. But here's the problem. When I start making choices about what kind of clothes I buy, what other choices am I going to start to want? Okay? And that's what you see start to happen. So Gorbachev has come in the mid-1980s as the Soviet Union's dealing with this, the Afghanistan war and trying to fix this economic stagnation. And here's the United States that had an economic malaise, right? Reagan comes in, and whether you believe he fixed the economy because of trickle down, which some people do, or if you believe that there were things put in motion, not necessarily by Carter, but maybe by Nixon, by Ford, that kind of thing, that when you have the increased confidence that Reagan brings in because of his positive Make America Great outlook, when that happens, people start spending. And that starts jumping the economy, okay? Economics is part policy, part emotion. They don't exist apart from each other. You can fix the policy all you want, but if the people in the country don't believe that this is a good thing, it's never going to work. Just like you can tell people, like they tried to with the Great Depression and the 2008 recession, oh, everything's going to be fine, everything's going to be fine, but that's not going to fix if people are losing their jobs, okay? So understand that Gorbachev is looking at a United States as being highly competitive, that's engaging with the rest of the world and is coming out of its economic malaise. And that's happening, and it's dominating globally as far as the economy at the same time that Reagan's talking tough about the military, okay? So here's Gorbachev. He opens up Glasnost for the economic flexibility, starts to talk about perestroika. We're going to open things up socially and culturally, okay? So this is going to take Reagan, and this is part of why Reagan's perceived as being, like I said, Saint Reagan, because of this. And does he have a hand in it? Sure, of course he does. But it's not all him, okay? There's lots of other factors that are coming into play. So here's Bush 41, campaigning in 1988. What difference does it make that he was the vice president? Well, as I said, he's got a little mud splattered on him because it wasn't all unicorns and rainbows under Reagan. But he's able to pull it out at the last minute between good campaigning and with the fact that most people believed better a known devil than an unknown angel. Do we really believe Dukakis and the Democrats are going to fix things? Here's what the result is. A Republican executive branch and a Democrat legislative branch. Okay? So it's not a solid win for Bush. Right? He's going to have to deal with Democrats in Congress, and that's going to create complications for him when he starts looking at the economy. When he starts trying to say, okay, this Cold War thing is coming to an end, we don't need to spend as much in the military, but if we're going to contract that spending, the economy is going to shudder. How do we fix it? And we also, by the time you get to 88 and 89, we have massive deficits. Okay? And that deficit is all on Reagan, FYI. Okay? He's been spending a ton of money, hasn't cut things like Medicare and Medicaid because that was political suicide, but he has cut a bunch of other programs. But he still hasn't made up for the massive spending that is the military. And his tax cuts have triggered this deficit. So here's Bush going, man, this deficit, man, it's like I'm carrying extra weight. I got to lose some of this because it's making it hard for the economy, for consumers to feel comfortable. They look at that deficit and they go, oh my gosh, right? And so we need to decrease that. And so Bush 41 is going to end up having to make a deal with Democrats, and he's going to have to raise taxes. And that's going to cost him big in 92. Okay? That and the fact that you've got some people that are frustrated with him in general. Okay? So the end of the Cold War, I've already kind of gone into the Soviet Union struggling and Gorbachev's reforms. So what's going to happen is that Gorbachev, as he's opened this thing up a little bit, okay, and we have Glasnost and Perestroika. Keep in mind that the Soviet Union controlled the Eastern Bloc of Europe, controlled that Iron Curtain area by constantly having its thumb on these countries. micromanaging them, control, even the ones that they weren't officially part of the Soviet Union, the ones that were under the sphere of influence, they did not have a lot of freedom. And the communist parties were able to hold on to power because, hey, all it took was a phone call for the Soviet Union to come in. But don't forget that places like Poland and East Germany and Czechoslovakia, those areas did not just sit down and go, oh, well, Stalin's here. I guess we have to be communist now. Like, the World War II did not see people just give up, right? You had a very healthy undercurrent in many of these Eastern European countries of resistance to communism and resistance to the Soviet Union. That undercurrent has been there all along. And at times, if we were European history, we would talk about the periods in which it kind of splashes up and makes a mess, right? But every time the Soviet Union was able to come in and put its finger on it. But Gorbachev's in office. He's a different kind of leader. He's not your Stalin-esque Communist Party, Khrushchev, Brezhnev kind of guy. Okay? He's different. And so as he's opening this up, even in Russia, people are starting to think differently. But in countries that had a strong undercurrent of resistance, oh my goodness, right? And they start to really demand more and more and more freedom. And this is going to, and as the Soviet Union is trying to loosen things up, they're trying to get out of Afghanistan because remember, this is about a global economy. And they've watched their economy falter and struggle to compete with all these capitalistic systems. Because even by this point, China is starting to modify its economy. Okay? Now, China is still communist. It means communist to this day. And they have their own issues in the late 1980s and early 1990s, and occasionally it flares up even today, with the fact that they have this kind of capitalistic economy, but politically and socially they're communist. Okay? Well, again, when you let people start choosing what they're going to buy, they're going to start wanting to have other opinions. And so the Chinese communists really work hard to control that social and political aspect of it while maintaining the freedom and flexibility of a capitalistic economy or a mixed economy, which is what Gorbachev was trying to do. But unfortunately for him, right, the Soviet Union has been engaged in this massive Cold War. They have far more baggage on them than China does. And he struggles to get the economy out. So he doesn't want to get sucked back into an Afghanistan. He doesn't want to have to go send troops to go help Poland to put down dissent. So he starts backing away from that. And it's into this that you're going to start to have that undercurrent become a wave. And so these satellite countries that are under the sphere of influence are going to start breaking away. And they're going to start having democratic elections. And ultimately, that's going to cause East Germany to break away. And East Germany is going to be like, yeah, well, we're going to let people travel, wherever they want. You're going to have Yugoslavia, that while Yugoslavia was not officially part of the communist sphere of influence, it was a communist country that held together these diverse ethnic populations that triggered World War I, FYI. And even Yugoslavia is going to get affected by this because as you have this economic competition, right, it's too much. People wanted to make money. They wanted that freedom. They wanted that economy. Right? And so that's what's going to help trigger some of this. So the Soviet Union's not going to be able to maintain control over its spheres of influence. They're going to basically tell the republics, hey, if you want to go, we'll let you, right? And so they start leaving. And you start having countries breaking away. And it's into this that you're going to have, especially by 88, right? This is why I say people kind of knew the Cold War was winding down. Now, the Berlin Wall does not fall until 89. But by 88, you're starting to see these things of the Soviet Union not trying to micromanage and control and stop dissent. And so Bush 41 is going to take office in 89 by the next fall. So within a year, you're going to have the Berlin Wall coming down. Because East Germany is going to say, yeah, well, we're going to stop worrying about it. You can go where you want. We're going to let you go. You can come back. You don't have to stay gone forever. And so the Germans are going to start gathering at that wall, and they're like, what the heck is this thing for anymore? And of course, most Germans hated that wall anyways, right? They were this horrible symbol of what the Cold War had done to their country. And so you have people getting sledgehammers and just attacking the wall, taking pieces of it. And that's why it's kind of a big deal, right? It symbolizes the end of the Cold War and kind of the complete change of our system. Now, in 1989, when that happens, because, I mean, that's the year I graduated, the first year I was in college, I mean, everyone thought, oh, hey, this is wonderful, right? We can focus on making money and all, whatever. In reality, this is the beginning of the War on Terror, right? The elements of terrorism that we live with today are actually at play in the 1990s. We just didn't know it. And part of that is because you no longer have the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union does not exist as an entity. It doesn't have that level of power and influence. It doesn't maintain that tight control. And so that's kind of why you're going to have that issue. All right, so we'll pick up tomorrow. On Tuesday, I'll talk a little bit more about the Soviet Union collapse and Boris Yeltsin and kind of the rise of Putin, and then we'll pick up the Gulf War and get as far through this as we possibly can on Tuesday. Okay?
But it's not.
Oh, it is 4:20. I didn't even think about that. Oh my gosh.